Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish therapist, a real life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. Today's episode is going to be about your Bish therapist was quoted in the New York Times, y'all. Ooh, sorry if that was so loud for people, but I am so excited. So today's episode, I'm going to share a little bit about that, how that all happened. No one is more surprised than I am, truly. And then today, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the quotes that I gave in the New York Post were about Kyle and Mauricio. And so I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills finale episode that collectively broke all of our hearts. And so I will, I'm working on, I encourage people not to over explain, and I'm a chronic over explainer too. But to be clear, so this episode comes off the heels of a wildly busy week for me. Last week, I was honored to be on Amy Phillips' podcast twice. We did one episode on Potomac, which has been so sleepy lately. But the one thing, my specialty is really finding some, little things tell me a lot. And so I can make a lot out of a little, clinically speaking. So it was interesting. We did talk about Potomac in that way. And then I was also talking with her about this Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Now, I had not been quoted in the New York Times prior to that episode. So that's kind of new information that I'm happy to share with you all. But I did talk about that with Amy and with Emily Dorisas, which was really great. And then another thing I did last week, so just so you all know, you can check this out. By the way, Amy's first episode, Amy Phillips, she has her Patreon. It's called Drama Darling. And the episode that I did about Potomac is behind her Patreon paywall. But the second episode is free to everybody wherever you listen to podcasts. And then I did another episode. I had the honor of meeting with her name is Jamie, and she has a podcast called Jamie All Over. She bravely, and this is a trigger warning, she bravely told her story of sexual abuse and domestic violence. I shared a little bit more personal information about my own trauma that I normally don't talk about on this podcast. But truly, it was an honor to sit with her as she bravely and courageously told her story. And so then what I provided was the psychological concepts behind, why are women not believed? Victims, because women aren't the only victims, that men are victims, people in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, right? So it's not just women who are victims, but why do victims not get believed and not listened to and things like that? So that podcast, I had so many people reach out to me about thanking us for sharing our experience, strength, and hope, and thanking me for my advocacy. I said a lot of things that I think helped a lot of people. Well, they shared that they did, and I'm just truly honored. So Jamie All Over podcast, for those of you who would like to listen to it, I will give you a really significant trigger warning now. It is a really tough episode, but it is powerful and it was really wonderful. So if you feel you're interested in that, please go ahead and check it out. But I do truly say this to all my folks, is that I appreciate your support, but don't ever listen to something that I'm doing if you feel it is going to put you in a bad mental space. I don't want that. I care more about your wellness than my numbers. So that is why I do these trigger warnings. That is why I make these comments, because trauma survivors appreciate them, and you really have to take that seriously. So that's what I'm going to say about that. So the point of the story is that last week was just amazingly wild for me in the best of ways. And the frustrating thing with my body is that I was reaching critical fatigue levels. And when that happens, I get these sores in my mouth. I know that's a little gross and TMI, but I have them right now and they're extremely painful. So, this episode is going to just be me doing the best I can, right? And so the reason that I share this is because I think that everything that I experience, I always want to, as hard as it is for me, I do always want to model for people. Like, all we can do when we have mental and physical health issues is make what my therapist and I call reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations are going to be how to do the things you want or need to do, but do them in a way that works best for where your body's at that day or that week. And this is my reasonable accommodation for today. The podcast is going to be shorter than it usually is. It's not going to be my signature deep dive. Um, but I'm going to share the reason that I'm doing it. And hopefully, this helps people realize that we all have limitations. And, we just have to, the best gift that we can give ourselves is to listen to that. So today I'm listening to myself. I'm still going to do a great episode, just going to be a little bit shorter than usual. And then what we have to look forward to this week, this is exciting. So this week I'm having on Ryan Bailey from So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. He has a podcast. He hosts an after show on SiriusXM with Jeff Lewis and some other folks. And he's just crushing it. And he's a real one. And I'm really excited. He'll be my first guest. To be honest, I've never had a guest before. So, also, I just want to thank all the people who are listening to this that, are just cheering me on. I've gotten so many amazing messages and such great support. As each season continues and as each episode continues, I grow and I evolve. And so now I'm going to be having guests on. I'm also having on a woman named Mandy Slutzker. She is a lobbyist, and we are going to cover how to survive the electoral cycle that's coming up, because I know we're all exhausted. And while I don't talk politics on this show, because it's so divisive and I just don't think it's helpful, what she and I are going to do is I'm going to talk about psychologically the things that we can do to avoid that, divisive kind of angry, frustrated approach that many of us had last election cycle, myself included. And what Mandy's going to talk to us about is what we can actually do to affect change at local levels, because I think sometimes we tend to feel helpless. Like, what can we possibly do? And the answer is there are things we can do. I mean, vote, 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 right? That's the main thing. But she's going to speak a little bit to that. And so I'm really excited about what I have coming up. I also have Amy Phillips scheduled to come on in the next few weeks. And, I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I'm excited. This is growing. And, I'm just kind of along for the ride like everybody else is. So people think I'm in the driver's seat, and I am, but it's a wild ride for me too, just to be super clear. Like, I'm a normal person. This is not, anything I ever thought I would be doing. So let me start by sharing what happened with the New York Times contacting me. So I got, and I'm the woman's name who wrote the article is Jessica Roy. I got an email. I woke up one morning and I look in my email and it said interview request from the New York Times. And I was like, oh, I am clearly being catfished. I mean, seriously, that was my first thought. I am clearly being catfished. This is not real. And it was to my personal email. It wasn't to my one that I list for your Bish therapist, which you can find that email in my link tree. But so I got really nervous, and I emailed back, and so we went back and forth, and I just decided, she wanted quotes. She explained what she wanted from me, but she wanted them um like immediately because she was working on the story. And let me be clear with you. People with chronic illness are going to appreciate this. So I had just woken up. And for me, because I have many autoimmune diseases, I have a chronic cancer, my immunotherapy makes me tired. I mean, I'm just like chronically exhausted, which is probably the most annoying thing of it all. And when I wake up in the morning, my brain really, it's like an old school dial up modem computer for those of us who are old enough to remember what that is. That it takes time to like warm up, and it makes like, crazy noises, and I'm just kidding. But I really struggle in the mornings, like really truly. And I said to myself, well, self, this is a wild opportunity, and you are sleepy. You've got some brain fog, but hit it, girl. Just do it and do your very best. So I did. And the article is called What's Going On Between Kyle Richards and Mauricio Umansky, Everything to Know About the Reality TV Stars and Their Separation. So the journalist took a couple of quotes from me, but ended up using only one or two of them, which is fine. Just like honored completely. So I will read to you the brief snippet. So for those of you who either don't have Instagram or don't follow me, I do post a lot of stuff like this on my Instagram page. So at your Bish therapist, Bish. I did post about the article, and I have it as a highlight on, my page and things like that. Um, so, okay, so I'm going to read this to you now. It says, sorry, but why does this matter? And this is where I come in, telling us why this matters. She says, to many reality TV fans, everything a housewife does matters. But Miss Richards and Mr. Umansky's separation has hit some fans especially hard because the couple has been one of reality TV's strongest and most committed. The quote starts, this family has been a part of our lives for 13 years, said Melissa Reich, a professional therapist, Bravo fan, and the host of your Bish Therapist podcast. I was like, oh my God. I just cannot believe that, like, whose life is this? I was like, what? That's amazing. And then it continues, my quote, Bravo fans, we do have these parasocial relationships and we are invested. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that Kyle and Mauricio's relationship was a solid blueprint and kind of a safe space for a lot of people, end quote. So there it is. That's my big New York Times debut. I'm proud, I'm excited. I mean, and here's the thing, like with that quote, the one thing that I do want to tie in is that the recent episode, season finale of Beverly Hills, Kyle talked a lot about feeling like she let people down. And so one thing that I guess I felt a little frustrated about is that although that was my quote, I it wasn't my entire quote in that Kyle's not responsible for being the blueprint for all of us about like what a great marriage should be. Like that is not her responsibility. So even though it is true, and I think that's why people are so invested, because we see so many couples on these housewives that just seem to just be a disaster, just like you can tell there's just, and I'm not going to point anybody out because I just feel that's a little bit, mean and unkind. But, we all know that there are couples that we just were like, we knew this wasn't going to last. There wasn't real love there. There was nothing really admirable about the relationship. But Kyle and Mauricio, they seem different. There was real love there. There is real love there because, the fact of the matter is when you're separated or divorced, love is a feeling that doesn't just evaporate into thin air. So, when people get divorced and separated, sometimes people's reactions, well, oh, well, how could you still be so friendly? Or how, I don't know. But when you grow up with someone and you've loved someone for 30 years of your life, that love doesn't just go away. So I guess the other part of my quote that I want to make sure I talk about here is that this is not Kyle and Mauricio's responsibility to make us all feel good about relationships. It's just not. Ultimately, they have to do what they feel is best for their family. And, I'll go into the scene in the finale where it was a little bit confusing because it was put into two categories where the day of the people article that there's a lot of mystery surrounding well who gave the story, because people, they're reputable, like they don't just run rumors of stories, like they don't do that. So somebody reputable had to have given that story. And it was interesting to me that Kyle and Mauricio and everyone seemed to be really confused about who that was. So that was interesting to me. But I think that, Kyle, one thing that became clear to me between that scene where, we're getting an update about their lives, and then the family meeting a week later that we have to keep in mind is that we're missing a part of the story here. I think sometimes when things feel disjointed, we're missing something. And Emily DeReese has pointed out that what the editors were incorrect with their timeline, and so I think for us it was just very confusing. But I'm just going to focus on like the main messages that I got from that information. So the first thing is that people first of all, people love to hate Kyle. And, I just don't, if people who, enjoy this podcast, they know that I'm not a hater of people. I don't like to disparage. If there's certain housewives that I genuinely enjoy more than others, but I do try to have a fair, balanced approach. People call me a Kyle apologist, which I hate that term. That term is such nonsense for like, what that term is about? Like, some people are so committed to disliking certain Bravo celebrities that I don't know what the term for that is, but it's like the opposite of an apology, just like a professional hater. Like some people are just professional Bravo celebrity haters, and I'm just never going to do that. So Kyle is a human being who is going through it. And what frustrates me is that when you watched the family meeting, all of these people for months and months and months talked about how this was staged for PR, which, I tend to have a good intuition about things. And my intuition, as long as I've listened to it, has never proven me wrong. And I mean, never. I felt intuitively that that was not the case, but watching the family meeting, anybody who thinks that this is some sort of stunt, you're either not paying attention or you are so blinded by your dislike for her that it is clouding your judgment. Because what I watched, that is truly what grief looks like. I cried. It gave me goosebumps to see the pain. I actually have goosebumps now as I'm talking about it. As an empathetic witness, as a therapist, I have witnessed, I've been an empathetic witness to a great deal of grief. And when you are in the presence of seriously painful grief, there are feelings I get in my body. I tend to get goosebumps. I get a little feeling in my belly, it's hard to explain, kind of like an achy feeling. I don't know how to explain it. It just happens to me. And so when I watched this, I felt all those feelings and I could feel their grief collectively. Um, you know, I kind of want to say except for Mauricio because I felt, I think, what Kyle feels, which is just like he just is disconnected. He just doesn't get it. He's not paying attention. He's focused so much on his stuff and the agency that I think like emotionally you really saw in that family meeting how he struggled to attend to the emotional needs of everybody. And especially there was one scene where Portia is still a teenager. So I think that the other girls are older and are now doing their own show with Mauricio on Netflix. I forget what it's called, but something the agency. But apparently, they talked about. And again, I'm sorry. I know I am kind of like stuttering, but this is part of my struggle today, right? So just please bear with me as I'm having a tough day. But Mauricio and the girls talked about the separation on their show. And Kyle was asked about this on Watch What Happens Live, and she kind of stammered and stuttered, and she said like she was kind of surprised by it too. So I do think that there's like production behind the scenes stuff that we're not seeing that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, because after all, these are shows, right? So these are people's real lives, and this grief is real, but it's like filming a real authentic grief, but like you're managing two reality shows, there's going to be some inauthenticity and some production value that gets like forced in here. And I think that's just what I noticed and what I felt. But when Portia, who is still the loss for her is wild because her older sisters, who by the way, like Kyle and Mauricio have done such a good job. Those girls are like all best friends despite their age differences, but Portia's the youngest one. So all of her sisters have left the house, they're doing their own thing. So she's now, at home by herself, and now her parents, the rocks of their life, they're very family oriented, are struggling. And what was so wild to me is, the girls said they feel like the rug was pulled out from under them because, Mauricio and Kyle were not being as honest about what was going on as they would have liked them to be, which is fair, for their children. Like Bravo fans to be like, well, she always says be honest, so just be honest. And it's like, well, here's the thing. Think about sometimes it's hard to be honest. And yeah, is Kyle really hard on people about that? Sure. But when you're going through something like this, I guess what I want to point out is that I think Kyle had a hard time being honest because she didn't even really know what she was feeling or thinking or what was going on, right? Now, when the People article came out, obviously there had been some decisions made, but I guess my point is like, we just have to remember our humanity and that sometimes when we're frustrated about people being honest or not being honest, they don't know what even to be honest about because they don't know how they're feeling. So, for example, with Morgan Wade and with Mauricio and all these things, I get the sense that Kyle is truly in a state of flux and evolution, and she is breaking out from the shell. She said on the show she was like she tried to be a perfect wife and a perfect mother, and those things were really instilled in her growing up with her mom. And I think that she did that to the point of ignoring herself a little bit. And now we're seeing a Kyle who wants to be free. She wants to be who she authentically wants to be. She doesn't want to be second to the agency. She wants Mauricio to listen. I mean, the amount of times I wrote down Kyle saying he's not listening, and guess what? He isn't, as evidenced by the white party. I'm going to talk about that for a minute. We have seen 13 years of white parties from the time when Portia was a teeny tiny little baby to now that she's, a teenager. And the interesting thing I thought about this white party is, to me, there are no coincidences, right? All the white parties, they were like, Kyle used the term sentimental, and I quote, but this felt the opposite of sentimental. This felt, commercialized and just like impersonal and so like famous and just the opposite of what Kyle and Mauricio had done for the past 13 years. And so I think that is a microcosm of what we're seeing in their relationship, right? Like these are two people who grew up together, they had nothing, and now they have everything. And sometimes it's like there's the saying, be careful what you wish for. Because, there's the show like about lottery winners once they win the lottery and sometimes when you get a lot of money and a lot of fame, managing your relationships is challenging and it changes things and it changes dynamics. And, I understand Mauricio, he's a boss and he's growing and he's building. And I mean, the agency is just like taking off. But it is clear to me that that has been prioritized over Kyle. And, once Kyle loses trust, and I think for most people, and I'll speak for me too, once you lose trust, it is really hard to gain that back. So going back to the white party, it was just so bizarre. So Mauricio says to Kyle, first of all, Kyle and the girls are walking out and he's at the buffet. Okay, so I think that is also very significant because in the past, Kyle and Mauricio, they would know where each other was, they would be respectful of each other, they would wait for each other, they'd come down together or what have you. It felt more connected. And this just felt really disjointed, which is a representation of what's going on in their marriage. And I think the other big thing was there was the scene where Kyle and Mo were talking about how Mauricio thought that the party was in the parking lot of SoFi Stadium instead of in SoFi Stadium. And, Kyle just laughed and she was like, this is just another example of him not listening. And they flashed back to Kyle and Mauricio talking in the kitchen, and she was explaining the party, and you could tell he wasn't listening. He was like getting a cup or something out of the cupboard. And like Mauricio was like he would be good like as a politician because he's like he can smile and he can laugh and he can act like he's engaged, but I can tell because of my intuition and just doing this for a long time that he's not listening at all. I just can tell that. And as Kyle's wife and someone who's known him and been with him for 30 years, if I can tell that, she's feeling that on a deep, deep level. Okay. So we're finally getting an understanding of they just keep missing each other, this disconnect. And I don't think it's because Kyle hasn't been clear. I just think it's because Mauricio is limited in what he is able to be providing at this point. So I think that, going back to the family meeting, it was also so fascinating to me that Mauricio and Kyle were talking about like um, continuing to live under the same roof. And then he was like, well, no. And she was like, well, what? And so to me, this again is a microcosm of what is happening in their relationship, which is just that they haven't figured it out themselves. So, how on earth can they share what it is when they haven't figured it out? I think that is the main crux of the problem. Whether it's being honest with their daughters or being honest with friends or being honest with the public, which, by the way, just because people are on TV doesn't mean they owe us their kidney. Okay. So, like, I think fans and people get very entitled, like, well, you need to do this and that. No, they don't. No, they don't. That's our expectation. That's not theirs. Just because you're on TV doesn't mean you have to like give. I don't know. It's just a wild thing. But I think my point is that Kyle and Mauricio can't, because there is a lack of communication, because there is a disjointed relationship, because there is a lack of understanding, they're having a hard time understanding what is, and therefore they're having a hard time communicating what is. That became really clear to me in that meeting. It became clear that they weren't on the same page about seeing other people or not seeing other people. Kyle saying, he can do what he wants, but then Mauricio taking that too far. So I guess my message is forget the name Kyle Richards for a second and just remember humanity when we're looking at this human being who, she lost a a 30-year relationship with the person who she thought she would be with forever. She's impacted her daughters, which Kyle's the type of person that I think she would rather die than hurt her children. She just loves them that much. Um, and I think, with the death of Laureen, which I've talked about many times, and Kyle even reposted that, this theory was correct, that, after Laureen died tragically, she felt so depressed and so alone. And Mauricio didn't, I theorized that Mauricio just emotionally wasn't capable of being there for her. And she actually responded and she said, not to me directly, of course, on her own stories. And she said, in fairness, I don't think anyone knew how to support me. So, but it confirmed that my assumption was correct, that Mauricio and there were a lot of people that just didn't know how to be there for someone who, lost a friend to suicide. And so, what I'm going to say about this quickly is that there is no mathematical complex algorithm for what to do. It's just being there. It's just being there and it's just listening. And sometimes it can be saying, I don't know the right thing to say and I don't know how to help you. I feel helpless, but I am here and I am with you. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just be with someone while they're and be an empathetic witness to their pain and holding their pain with them. It truly is the only answer. And I promise you, as someone who's been a giver and a receiver of that, it is life saving and life changing. And I think had Kyle gotten that, we would have seen this play out very differently. And, no shade to, like, it's okay sometimes that we don't know how to do that. But again, I just think it comes down to people in grief. They don't need you to like solve their problems. They just need you to sit with them and hold their pain and just be with them. And guess what? You know why some people have a hard time with that? Because we get uncomfortable with other people's emotions. And so sometimes when we can't sit with their pain, that's also because we can't sit with ours. So listen, we're all just works in progress, but hopefully, that helps people. So the thing that made me really frustrated in the family meeting was, Kyle. So Portia is, hysterically crying because it's like we are. It felt invasive to me because it's like we are watching this family go through something very real with cameras pointed in their face. And now the other side to that coin would have been, imagine if they didn't film that, people would have been up in arms. So it's like they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. But in my opinion, seeing Portia, it just broke my heart. And I just thought to myself for a second, what are we doing here? These are people's real lives. And do we really need to be watching this? But Kyle was just comforting Portia because she is a wonderful mom and she gets it and she understands and she's hugging Portia. And Mo looks at Portia and he says, "What's wrong, Portia?" And I was just like, what's wrong? Mauricio, this is part of the freaking problem. What do you mean, what's wrong? This child is watching the disintegration of her family, which is the most important rock for her at this time in her life. And you are asking her what is wrong. Now, do I believe that he really didn't understand what was wrong? Kind of. I mean, I just think that these are all blaring examples of Mauricio's incapability at this moment to be the emotional support that any of his family needs him to be. And that sucks because Mauricio seems like a great person. He seems like a great guy. He and Kyle seem to have a wonderful relationship. They were supportive of each other and he seems wonderful in a lot of ways. But unfortunately, as I always say, I've been with my husband for almost 22 years. And when you're in a multiple decades long relationship, you have to listen to your partner. The foundation of healthy, successful, long term, multi decades relationships is emotional support and communication. That's the foundation, truly. And if that's gone, the foundation cracks and then there goes the building. And it's more complex than that, but that really is what this boils down to, in my opinion. So I just think that Kyle needed, but also realized she wanted more for herself in a relationship. And one thing that really got me is Kyle's, whatever, I guess the interviews. She was so raw and she was so vulnerable. And she just said, I wouldn't want my girls if I'm in a situation where I wouldn't want my girls to be, I have to be a model for that. She didn't say those words exactly. I'm paraphrasing, but I just think like what an amazing woman to be able to say, because a lot of women and people do this. They think, well, I wouldn't want my child to deal with this, but somehow this is okay for me. And I give Kyle that credit to say she really wants to walk the walk and model for her daughters about like, if you're not getting what you need out of a relationship, don't stay in it. And so I don't know. I kind of thought that was really beautiful. But it was awfully sad. I mean, I cried a lot. You could just see the grief in her face. And when she said, when she was having that conversation with Erica about, and what if we can't work it out, that proves my point of what I'm saying, which is she doesn't know, right? Like we can't be mad at somebody for not being honest about something that they don't themselves understand. Okay? So I've probably said that 1 million times. I know I need to let that go. It's just frustrating. And here's the thing about Erica, side note. I love what Erica said to her. The advice that she gave her was really solid. But here is what is strange to me. Erica is truly an enigma wrapped in a riddle because it's like she can do that for Kyle and like give her good feedback and be that friend who's like a good mix of like empathetic, but also like tell someone what they need to hear. But then she's like asking her therapist what empathy is. And so for me, I have to do some more analysis on that. I mean, my immediate thought is that Erica is more emotionally intelligent than she likes to let on, because you can't be smart and dumb. You can't be both. And trust me, I'm not calling her dumb. I'm just using that as an example. I think these ladies are wonderfully intelligent in many ways. So, that just like confused me about Erica. But so the one other thing that I wanted to say is that and this is gonna oh gosh, I don't often like I won't comment on women's appearance because I'm just like a supportive person, truly feminist, and I just, I don't believe in that. But the thing of it is when we saw Dorit's her reunion look, that red thing that kind of went over her head and the hair just like on her forehead, all that came into my mind, because this is just like my brain has this like dark humor that is the automatic factory default setting for me. I could not think of anybody other than Catherine O'Hara's character, Delia Dietz in Beetlejuice. And if you don't know what that is, please Google that. And then you will laugh hysterically because it's just the hair that's plastered to the head. That's kind of what Delia Dietz was known for. Like the hair's plastered to the face, because she was very avant garde and, stylish and all of these things. And listen, I like a risk. I think taking a risk is great. But the problem is that the look was great standing up. I mean, it did give a little Delia Dietz, but when she sat down, from the side, she kind of looked like E.T. Because of the head thing over her hair, and she had like a bun or something back here. So it just, I guess what I'm saying is that these ladies it's, I'm not here to judge everyone. You take a risk, and so many people have comments about it. I can't imagine how hard that is. I just feel that Dorit needs someone to be honest with her, um, and think of all these different scenarios, because that had to be a wild reunion, having her sit there like with this thing on her half on her head, and like I don't know how it is turning her head. But anyway, so what's going to happen is Ryan Bailey's going to come on this week. We're going to talk about Beverly Hills. At that point, the reunion part one will be out, so we'll see how that works for Dorit with turning her head. Um, and we're I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, from the reunion trailer, what we saw was that um you know Andy does ask some pretty hard hitting questions about um Morgan and things like that. And one last thing that I'm going to say about this, because I said this on Amy Phillips, is that whether or not Morgan and Kyle are together, I think that, like, romantically, I think that Morgan has just played an important role in Kyle's life, and like we all need support in hard times. And so I appreciate their relationship for that. Number one. Number two, what frustrates me is sexuality and sexual orientation. There's a fluidity to it that I don't really love how a lot of folks are talking about it like she's a lesbian. First of all, people are saying it like lesbian is a bad word. So let's just be real clear that being gay isn't bad and it's not an insult. Number one. And number two is that it's not, so we can't be so reductive as to say, well, when she was with Mo, she was straight and now she's a lesbian with Morgan. It's like sexuality is more fluid than that. And I think that, being culturally competent and being competent in the issues of the LGBTQIA plus community, I just want to speak to that for a moment about we can't be so reductive. And, I understand it's shocking for people, like, I get that, but I just also, like, let's just give that a rest for a little bit. There's tons of different, there's demisexual, which is, it doesn't have anything to do with the sex of the person that you love. It has to do with loving, needing a connection. Or pansexual, which is where you don't necessarily care about the label or what the person looks like. It's about what's inside, that matters. And so it's not as easy as gay or straight anymore. And I think, just like for me, that's really just an important PSA. So that is going to be it for me today. This might be the shortest podcast I've ever done, but thank you all for your understanding, and appreciation and your support. Please, 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 if you can, wherever you listen to podcasts, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, please give me a 5-star rating. Please follow me on Instagram if you have Instagram at Your Bish Therapist. There is full video of this on YouTube, also at Your Bish Therapist. And, I just thank you. I just thank you all, and I'm very appreciative. So please look forward to tons of amazing content in the next couple of weeks. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to say is I also am planning on doing an episode about Natalia Grace, but I realized what I was doing is I was kind of putting it off because A, it's a lot of information, but B, Amy asked me this on her pod, so I'll share this with you. She kind of was like, it seems like you're putting it off. And I was like, well, yeah. And I didn't realize why I was. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to watch The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, there's season 1 and season 2. If you want to follow along with one of my upcoming podcasts, please watch that. If not, that's fine. I'm going to cover it so you don't have to. But here's what I realized. The dad, Michael Barnett, I feel, we all know, right? Knowing me, that I have a lot of passion. And when I have a lot of passion, I have a sharp tongue. And that has been my problem my entire life. I cannot hide my expressions. I cannot hide my passion. It's gotten me in trouble my entire life, but I now view it as a strength. Michael Barnett, I feel allergic. to him as a person. Like, sincerely, I need an EpiPen, I need Benadryl, I need medication. I feel allergic to him. And so, as I'm going to be talking about it, I have to be mindful of that because, the thing is that Melissa, your Bish therapist, I really have to maintain a sense of professionalism and respect and humanity because that is truly my morals and values. But Melissa, the person behind the Bish, has a spicy inner child, a very spicy one, extra spicy, in fact. So I am going to figure out how to do that episode in a way that is good for me and good for you all. And so it's going to be a good one. So I just wanted to let you know, if you watch that, please know you're not alone in that feeling. Okay, so this is going to be it for me today. Thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.